The loaf was still warm from the baker's oven when Phillip Reeves tore it in half, watching hunger sharpen the green-skinned girl's gaze as she stared at the bread vendor's stall from across the dusty market square. She stood apart from the crowds, pressed against the wooden fence that marked the livestock pens, her worn leather vest and patched trousers hanging loose on her frame. Her tusks were small, barely visible when she closed her mouth, but her pointed ears twitched at every passing conversation, every merchant's call, every whispered slur about orcs that drifted through the afternoon air. Philip had noticed her an hour ago when he first arrived in Millbrook, this border town, where humans and orcs existed in uneasy proximity, but rarely in kindness. He had come to sell his late father's tools, the last remnants of the smithy that had burned down 3 months prior, leaving him with nothing but debts and the clothes on his back. The bread had cost him 2 copper pieces he could barely afford, but his stomach had been gnawing at his ribs since dawn, and he had given in to the weakness of hunger. Now, watching the orc girl press one hand against her flat belly while her amber eyes tracked every loaf the baker sold, Philip felt something shift inside his chest. He walked toward her slowly, weaving between carts and farmers arguing over grain prices, and when he stood before her, she went rigid, her body coiling like she expected violence. "Here," he said simply, extending half the loaf toward her. "You look like you need this more than I do." Her eyes widened, darting from the bread to his face and back again, suspicion warring with desperate need in her expression. "Why?" The word came out rough, her voice unused to gentleness from strangers. "Because you are hungry and I have more than I need right now." It was not quite true, but true enough. He could eat half and survive until tomorrow. She looked like she had not eaten in days. For a long moment she did not move. Then her hand shot out, quick as a striking snake, and she snatched the bread from his fingers. She did not run, though, did not bolt like a wild thing. Instead, she tore into it with her teeth, chewing fast, swallowing hard, and Philip saw the shine of moisture in her eyes that had nothing to do with the bread itself. "Thank you," she managed between bites, and those 2 words sounded like they cost her something precious, some piece of pride or dignity she had been clinging to. Philip nodded and turned to go, thinking that would be the end of it, a small kindness in a hard world. But her voice stopped him before he had taken 3 steps. "Wait." She swallowed the last of the bread and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "I am Ferra Flint. You gave me food without asking for anything. That is not something humans do for my kind." "Phillip Reeves," he replied, studying her more carefully now. Up close, he could see the sharp intelligence in those amber eyes, the way she held herself despite her obvious hunger, like she had been something more before circumstances brought her low. "And I suppose I am not like most humans then." A ghost of something that might have been a smile touched her lips. "No, I suppose you are not." She hesitated, glancing toward the setting sun that painted the western sky in shades of orange and gold. "I have no money to repay you, but I am strong. I can work. If you need labor, I can give you that much." Philip considered this. He had planned to sleep rough tonight in the woods outside town where his coin would not be stolen and his throat would not be cut. He had no work to offer her, no farm or forge or business. But looking at Ferra, at the way she stood straighter now that food sat in her belly, at the fierce determination in her eyes, he felt that strange shift in his chest again, like a door opening that he had not known was closed. "I am heading south at first light," he said slowly. "To Greenvale. I heard they need workers at the lumber camps there. If you want to walk that road together, you would be welcome company." Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for deception or ulterior motive. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she gave a sharp nod. I will meet you at the south gate when the sun rises. And Phillip Reeves, if you try anything improper, I will break both your arms." He could not help the laugh that escaped him, rough and startled. Julie noted. She turned then and melted into the shadows between buildings, moving with a grace that surprised him. Philip stood in the emptying market square, holding his half of the loaf, and wondered what impulse had possessed him to invite a strange orc woman on a week-long journey through wilderness and farmland. But when he bit into the bread, it tasted better than it had any right to, and he slept that night with something close to hope warming his chest. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Philip reached the south gate, his worn pack slung over one shoulder and his father's best hammer tucked through his belt. Ferra was already waiting, leaning against the wooden palisade with her arms crossed, and he noticed she had cleaned the dirt from her face and tied her dark hair back with a strip of leather. She looked different in the dawn light, less like a desperate refugee and more like a warrior resting between battles. "You came," she said, and there was something almost like surprise in her voice. "I said I would." Philip adjusted his pack and started walking, and after a moment, she fell into step beside him. They walked in silence for the first hour, following the rutted dirt road that wound south through fields of wheat and barley. Farmers already working their plots watched them pass with suspicious eyes, and Philip heard more than one muttered curse about orcs and the fools who traveled with them. Ferra's jaw tightened each time, but she kept her gaze forward and her stride steady. "How long have you been on your own?" Philip asked finally, when the farms had thinned out and the forest began to close in around the road. Ferra was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. 6 months. My clan cast me out for refusing to raid a human settlement. I said it was dishonorable to attack people who had done us no harm, who were just trying to survive the winter like we were. My father said I was weak, contaminated by human softness, so they took my name from the clan rolls and drove me into the wilderness. The pain in those words was carefully hidden, but Philip heard it anyway, the raw wound of rejection and loss. "I am sorry," he said and meant it. She shrugged, but the gesture was tight. "And you? What drives you south to the lumber camps?" "Fire," Philip said simply. "My father's smithy burned 3 months ago. He died trying to save the forge. I have been trying to pay off his debts ever since, but there is no work for a blacksmith without a forge and no money to build a new one. So I am going where strong backs are needed and questions are not asked." Ferra glanced at him sidelong. "You are a smith," he corrected. "Now I am just a man with calloused hands and empty pockets." "The hands remember," she said quietly. "Skills do not die with forges." Something about the way she said it made Philip think she was talking about more than just metalwork, but he did not press. They walked on, and as the morning stretched into afternoon, the silence between them became more comfortable, less like strangers keeping wary distance and more like companions who did not need to fill every moment with words. They stopped at midday beside a stream, and Philip refilled their water skins while Ferra disappeared into the underbrush. She returned 10 minutes later with a rabbit hanging from her hand, already gutted and cleaned. "You hunt?" Philip asked, impressed despite himself. "I survive," Ferra replied, and there was pride in her voice now, the kind that came from hard-won competence. "Do you have flint?" He did, and soon they had a small fire crackling. The rabbit spitted over the flames. The smell of cooking meat made Philip's mouth water, and he realized this would be the first real meal either of them had eaten in days. When the meat was ready, Ferra tore the rabbit in half with her bare hands and offered him the larger portion. "You gave me bread yesterday," she said when he hesitated. "Today I give you meat. We are even." But they were not really, because the rabbit would have kept her fed for 2 days if she had been alone, and she had given him more than half. Philip took the meat anyway, recognizing the gift for what it was, an offering of trust and partnership. They ate in companionable silence, and when they continued south, Philip found himself watching Ferra with new appreciation. She moved through the world with a kind of fierce independence, but there were moments when her guard dropped, when she would pause to admire a flowering vine or smile at a bird's call. And in those moments, she looked younger, less burdened by the weight of rejection and survival. By the time dusk painted the sky in purples and golds, they had covered nearly 15 miles, and Philip's feet ached in his worn boots. Ferra led them off the road to a clearing she seemed to know, a sheltered space beneath an old oak where the ground was soft with moss. "We will camp here," she said, already gathering deadwood for a fire. "The road is not safe after dark, and we are both too tired to fight off bandits if they come." Philip helped build the fire, and they sat on opposite sides of the flames, the flickering light casting dancing shadows across Ferra's green skin. She had taken off her leather vest, and he could see the play of muscle across her shoulders and arms, the evidence of a hard life lived without softness or mercy. "Why did you really invite me to walk with you?" Ferra asked suddenly, her amber eyes catching the firelight and holding it. "Human men do not help orc women without reason. Do you want something from me?" The blunt question caught Philip off guard, but he appreciated her directness. "No," he said honestly. "I saw someone hungry and I had food. I saw someone alone and I was alone too. It seemed foolish for us both to walk the same road separately when we could walk it together and be safer for it." "That is all." She sounded skeptical. "That is all," he confirmed. Then, after a pause, he added, "Though I will admit, it is nice to have someone to talk to. I have been alone since my father died, and the silence gets heavy after a while." Something in Ferra's expression softened. "Yes," she said quietly, "it does." They talked long into the night, trading stories of their lives before loss had found them. Philip told her about his father's forge, the heat and hammer song of metalwork, the satisfaction of shaping raw iron into something useful and beautiful. Ferra told him about her clan's summer hunts, the way the warriors would sing challenge songs before battle, the fierce joy of running free through the mountains with her kin. "You miss them?" Philip asked. "Your clan?" "Every day," Ferra admitted, and there was no shame in her voice now, just honest grief. "But I would make the same choice again. Raiding innocent people is wrong, no matter what my father says about human weakness or orc superiority. Honor matters more than belonging." "That must have taken incredible courage," Philip said softly. Ferra met his gaze across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition of kindred spirits who had both sacrificed security for principle. "So does giving half your bread to a stranger," she replied. Philip felt heat rise in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the flames. He looked away, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment felt, how the darkness around them seemed to press close, creating a world that contained only the two of them and the crackling fire. "We should sleep," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "Long walk tomorrow." Ferra nodded, but her eyes lingered on him a moment longer before she turned to arrange her bedroll on the far side of the clearing. Philip lay down with his back to the fire, listening to her breathing slow and deepen, and wondered why his heart was beating so hard in his chest. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. They would wake at dawn, walk until midday, rest and eat whatever Ferra managed to hunt or forage, then continue until dusk. They talked more each day, the conversations ranging from practical matters like the best way to skin a deer to deeper subjects like faith and purpose, and what made a life worth living. Philip found himself looking forward to these talks, to the way Ferra's face would light up when she was passionate about something, or the rare, genuine smile that transformed her features from stern to radiant. He noticed small things too, like the way she would unconsciously touch her tusks when she was thinking, or how she always positioned herself between him and potential danger when they passed other travelers on the road. On the fourth evening, as they made camp beside a farmer's abandoned barn, Philip finally acknowledged the truth he had been avoiding. He was falling for Ferra Flint, this fierce orc woman who had been cast out by her people for having the courage to stand for what was right. The realization should have frightened him, should have sent him running back to the familiar prejudices and safe distances of human society. Instead, it settled into his chest like a warm coal, burning steady and sure. But what could come of it? Even if she felt the same way, which he had no reason to believe, they were heading to a lumber camp where humans and orcs worked side by side but lived in separate compounds. Interspecies relationships were not just taboo, they were dangerous. People had been killed for less. Philip was still wrestling with these thoughts when Ferra emerged from the barn, her expression troubled. "Someone has been here recently," she said. "There are tracks inside and signs of a camp. Multiple people." Before Philip could respond, rough voices sounded from the tree line and 6 men stepped into the clearing, their weapons drawn and their intentions clear in their predatory grins. "Bandits." "Well, well," the leader said, a scarred man with a sword hanging loose in his grip. "What do we have here?" "A traveler and his pet orc." Ferra's hand went to the hunting knife at her belt, and Philip moved to stand beside her, pulling his father's hammer free. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had never been a fighter, but he would not let these men hurt Ferra without a battle. "We have nothing worth stealing," Philip said, keeping his voice level. "Let us pass and there does not need to be trouble." The bandit leader laughed. "Oh, I think you have plenty worth taking. Those boots look good and that hammer could fetch a price. As for the orc, well, we will figure out something to do with her." The way he said it made Philip's blood boil. He hefted the hammer, feeling the familiar weight of it in his palm, the balance his father had forged into the steel. "Touch her and you die," he said flatly. That got a bigger laugh from the bandits, but Ferra placed a hand on Philip's arm, her touch burning through the fabric of his shirt. "There are 6 of them," she said quietly. "We cannot win." "I will not let them take you," Philip replied, meeting her eyes, letting her see the absolute truth of that statement. Something shifted in Ferra's expression, a fierce tenderness that made his breath catch. "Then we fight together," she said, drawing her knife and dropping into a fighting stance. The bandits charged and chaos erupted. Philip swung his hammer in a wide arc, catching the first man in the ribs with a sickening crunch. Beside him, Ferra moved like water, her knife flashing in the fading light as she opened a long cut across another bandit's forearm. They fought back to back, covering each other's blind spots, and Philip felt a surge of something that might have been joy mixed with terror as they moved in perfect synchronization. But there were too many. A sword blade caught Philip's shoulder, sending bright pain lancing down his arm. He heard Ferra cry out as a cudgel struck her hip, saw her stumble, and rage filled him like nothing he had ever known. He roared and brought his hammer down on the bandit leader's knee, felt bone shatter beneath the blow, and the man went down screaming. That changed the dynamics. The other bandits, seeing their leader crippled, and 2 of their companions injured, hesitated. Philip raised his hammer again, blood running hot down his arm, and Ferra stood beside him, breathing hard but defiant. And together, they looked like something out of legend, a warrior and his shield maiden standing against the darkness. "Get out," Philip snarled, and his voice carried a command he had not known he possessed. "Before I finish what you started." The bandits grabbed their wounded and fled into the forest, leaving only their leader writhing on the ground. Phillip stood over him, hammer raised, and for a moment he considered ending it, considered making sure this man would never threaten another traveler. "Phillip," Ferra said softly, her hand gentle on his uninjured shoulder. "Let him go. We are not killers." The touch grounded him, pulled him back from the edge of something dark and final. He lowered the hammer and stepped back, watching as the bandit leader dragged himself into the underbrush, whimpering with pain and fear. Then the adrenaline drained out of Philip's body all at once, and he sat down hard, suddenly aware of how badly his shoulder hurt. Ferra knelt beside him immediately, her face creased with concern as she examined the wound. "It is deep," she said grimly. "We need to clean it and bind it, or infection will set in." She worked with brisk efficiency, tearing strips from her spare shirt to make bandages, cleaning the wound with water from their skins, her hands surprisingly gentle despite their strength. Philip watched her face as she worked, saw the concentration there, the care, and felt something inside him crack open. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for fighting with me." Ferra's hand stilled and she looked up at him, their faces suddenly very close in the gathering darkness. "You stood between me and 6 armed men," she said, her voice rough with emotion. "You would have died for me. Why would I do anything less for you?" "Because I am just a human," Philip replied. "And you have already lost everything once for choosing humans over your clan." "You are not just anything," Ferra said fiercely, her amber eyes blazing. "You are the first person in 6 months to look at me like I was a person instead of a monster. You shared your food when you had barely enough for yourself. You invited me to walk with you when you could have traveled safer alone. You fought for my honor like it mattered, like I mattered." Her voice broke on the last words, and Philip saw tears gathering in her eyes, threatening to spill over. Without thinking, he reached up with his good hand and cupped her cheek, feeling the warmth of her skin against his palm. "You matter," he said, pouring everything he felt into those 2 words. "You matter to me, Ferra, more than you should, probably. More than is wise, but I cannot help it. Somewhere between the market square and this moment, you became important to me. You became mine." The tears spilled over now, tracking down her green cheeks, and Ferra leaned into his touch like she was starving for it. "By all the gods," she whispered, "I thought I was alone in this. I thought these feelings were foolish, impossible, that you would laugh if you knew how I lay awake at night thinking about you." Philip's heart was thundering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "You think about me, constantly," Ferra admitted, a shaky laugh escaping her. "You are kind and brave, and you look at the world like it could be better than it is. How could I not think about you? How could I not wish that things were different, that we lived in a world where an orc and a human could be together without fear?" "Then let us make that world," Philip said, and he was surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "Here now, just the 2 of us. Let us decide that we do not care what anyone else thinks. I want you, Ferra Flint. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep knowing you are safe. I want to hear your voice every day and watch you smile. I want everything, if you will have me." For a long moment, Ferra just stared at him, her expression caught between hope and disbelief. Then she surged forward and kissed him, her lips urgent and desperate against his, and Philip forgot about his injured shoulder, forgot about the bandits and the danger and the impossible odds against them. All that existed was Ferra's mouth on his, her hands cradling his face like he was something precious, the taste of salt and hope and belonging. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ferra pressed her forehead against his and whispered, "You are mine, Phillip Reeves. From the moment you broke your loaf in half, you were mine. I just did not have the courage to claim you until now." "Then I am yours," Phillip replied, his voice shaking with emotion. "And you are mine. Whatever comes, we face it together." They held each other as night fell completely, the pain of their injuries forgotten in the overwhelming relief of finally acknowledging what had been building between them since that first meeting in the market square. Eventually, Ferra finished bandaging Philip's shoulder and checked her own bruised hip, pronouncing them both fit to travel despite the soreness. They decided to stay in the abandoned barn that night, taking turns keeping watch in case the bandits returned. But the night passed quietly, and when dawn broke, Philip and Ferra continued south, hand in hand now, no longer pretending to be merely traveling companions. The remaining 3 days to Greenvale passed in a blur of discovery and deepening affection. They talked constantly, learning everything about each other, from Ferra's favorite season to Philip's childhood fear of thunderstorms. They kissed often, sweet stolen moments beside the road or during their midday rest, each touch reinforcing the impossible reality of what they had found in each other. But as the lumber camp came into view on the 7th day, reality reasserted itself with brutal clarity. The camp was divided into clear sections, human workers on one side, orc laborers on the other, and a wide no-man's land between them enforced by armed guards. Philip felt Ferra's hand tighten in his as they approached, saw the resignation in her eyes. "We cannot let them know," she said quietly. "Not yet. Not until we have established ourselves, earned enough coin to leave and go somewhere else. Somewhere we can be together openly." Philip wanted to argue, wanted to shout his love for her to the heavens and damn anyone who had a problem with it. But he knew she was right. They needed time, resources, a plan. So he nodded, even though releasing her hand felt like tearing off a piece of his own flesh. They registered separately, Philip with the human foreman and Ferra with the orc crew boss. The work was hard, dangerous labor felling trees and hauling lumber, but Philip threw himself into it with grim determination. Every log he cut, every coin he earned, brought them closer to freedom, to a life where they would not have to hide. He saw Ferra, sometimes across the camp, her green skin flashing in the sunlight as she worked, and their eyes would meet with the force of physical touch. Other times, they would manage to slip away during meal breaks, finding hidden corners where they could steal a few precious minutes together, trading kisses and whispered reassurances that this was temporary, that they would find a way. It was during one of these stolen moments, 3 weeks into their time at the lumber camp, that Philip heard footsteps approaching their hiding spot behind the tool shed. He and Ferra sprang apart just as a human worker rounded the corner, a man named Marcus who Philip knew slightly from the felling crews. Marcus stopped dead, his eyes going wide as he took in the scene, the way Philip and Ferra stood too close, the obvious guilt on both their faces. "Holy gods," Marcus breathed. "You and the orc, are you insane?" "Marcus, please," Philip began, but the other man was already backing away, shaking his head. "This is wrong," Marcus said. "This is against nature. I should report you both." Ferra stepped forward, her voice low and urgent. "Please do not. We are not hurting anyone. We just want to be left alone." But Marcus was not listening. He turned and ran toward the main camp, and Philip knew with sinking certainty that everything was about to fall apart. He grabbed Ferra's hand and pulled her in the opposite direction, toward the forest that bordered the camp. "We have to run," he said urgently. "Right now, before they come for us." Ferra did not argue. They sprinted into the trees, leaving behind the wages they had earned, the small measure of security they had built. Behind them, shouts rose up, angry voices calling for blood, for justice, for the unnatural lovers to be found and punished. They ran for hours, pushing through underbrush and across streams, until Philip's lungs burned and Ferra was limping on her bruised hip that had never fully healed. Finally, when they could run no more, they collapsed in a small clearing, gasping for breath. "I am sorry," Philip panted. "This is my fault. I should have been more careful, should have made sure we were truly alone." "Stop," Ferra said firmly. She crawled over to him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "This is not your fault. We knew the risks. We chose each other anyway." "But now we have nothing again," Philip said, and he hated the despair in his voice. "No money, no plan, nowhere to go." "We have each other," Ferra replied. "That is more than nothing. That is everything." Philip pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her, pine and earth and something uniquely Ferra. She was right. They had each other. But how long could they survive on love alone, running from place to place, always hiding, always afraid? As if reading his thoughts, Ferra pulled back and looked at him seriously. "I have been thinking," she said. "There are places beyond the frontier, farther south, where the old prejudices hold less power. Settlements built by exiles and outcasts, people who did not fit in the established kingdoms. We could go there, build a life there." "How far south?" Philip asked. "A month's travel, maybe more," Ferra admitted. "Through wilderness and unclaimed territory, it would be dangerous." Philip thought about it for exactly 3 seconds before nodding. "Then we go south. We keep going until we find somewhere we can be together without fear. And if no such place exists, then by all the gods, we will build it ourselves." A fierce smile split Ferra's face, and she kissed him hard, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. When they broke apart, they were both grinning like fools despite their exhaustion and the uncertainty ahead. They traveled south for 5 weeks, living off the land, avoiding settlements and other travelers. Ferra taught Philip to hunt and track, skills his father had never passed down. Philip taught Ferra about metalwork and construction, knowledge that might prove useful when they finally found a place to settle. They grew lean and hard and completely interdependent, 2 halves of a whole that functioned with seamless synchronization. Finally, after weeks of walking, they crested a ridge and looked down at a valley unlike anything Philip had ever seen. A river wound through green meadows, and scattered along its banks were structures built from wood and stone, but not in any organized pattern. Some buildings looked human in design, others clearly orcish, and still others seemed to be a blend of styles, as if the inhabitants had simply built what made sense rather than adhering to tradition. "What is this place?" Philip breathed. An old man's voice answered from behind them, and they spun to find a gray, bearded human leaning on a walking stick, watching them with knowing eyes. "This is Refuge," he said. "A place for people who do not fit anywhere else. We have humans and orcs here, yes, but also half-elves and dwarf outcasts and anyone else who needs a place to start over. No judgment, no old hatreds, just hard work and honest dealing." Philip and Ferra exchanged a glance, hardly daring to hope. "We are together," Ferra said bluntly. "Human and orc. If that is a problem, tell us now." The old man chuckled. "Girl, we have 3 mixed couples in Refuge already and nobody bats an eye. Love is love, and in a place like this, we need all the love we can get to balance out the harshness of frontier life. You 2 look like you have been through hell. Come down to the valley, get some food in you, and we will find you a plot to build on." Philip felt tears prick his eyes, and beside him, Ferra made a choked sound that might have been a sob or a laugh or both. They followed the old man down into the valley, and with each step, Philip felt the weight he had been carrying since the lumber camp lift a little more. Refuge was everything its name promised. The people there accepted Philip and Ferra without question, even offering to help them build a small cabin at the edge of the settlement where the meadow met the forest. Philip's blacksmithing skills were in high demand, and a local orc metalworker named Grauk offered to share his forge in exchange for Philip teaching him some of the finer techniques of human smithing. Ferra found work as a hunter, providing meat for the community and earning respect for her skill with a bow. In the evenings, she and Philip would return to their cabin, still little more than 4 walls and a roof, and work together to make it a home. They hung herbs from the rafters to dry, built a proper hearth, carved simple furniture from fallen logs. 3 months after arriving in Refuge, on a clear autumn evening when the leaves had turned to gold and crimson, Philip asked Ferra to marry him. He had no ring, no grand gesture, just the two of them sitting on the porch of their cabin watching the sun set over the valley. "I want to bind my life to yours properly," he said, taking her hand. "Not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of whatever gods watch over this place. Will you marry me, Ferra Flint? Will you let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you as happy as you have made me?" Ferra was crying openly now, tears streaming down her green cheeks. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married a week later in a ceremony that blended human and orc traditions, with the whole settlement turning out to witness and celebrate. Grauk stood as witness for Ferra, and Marcus, the old man who had found them on the ridge, stood for Philip. They exchanged vows under an old oak tree, promising to love and protect and honor each other for as long as they both lived. When Philip kissed his wife for the first time as husband and wife, the assembled crowd cheered, a joyful sound that echoed across the valley. Looking at Ferra, at the radiant happiness in her amber eyes, Philip thought back to that day in the market square when he had broken his loaf in half for a hungry orc girl. He had given her bread without knowing it would change his life, without understanding that the simple act of kindness would lead him here, to this moment, to this impossible joy. "What are you thinking?" Ferra asked, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his chest. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Philip replied honestly. "That somehow, despite everything, we found each other and we found this place. That breaking a loaf of bread was the best decision I ever made." Ferra laughed, the sound rich and full of contentment. "You know, in orc culture, sharing food with someone is a declaration of intent. When you gave me that bread, you were essentially claiming me as yours, whether you knew it or not." Philip pulled back to look at her, eyebrows raised. "Is that true?" "Absolutely," Ferra said, her eyes dancing with mischief. "By dusk that day, I had already decided you were mine. I just had to wait for you to realize it too." Philip shook his head in wonder and pulled her close again, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the strong, steady beat of her heart against his chest. Around them, their friends and neighbors danced and sang, celebrating love in all its forms, and overhead, the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, constant and eternal. They had traveled far from that dusty market square, through danger and doubt and desperate flight. They had fought bandits and prejudice and their own fears. But here, now in this valley called Refuge, they had found something worth more than safety or comfort or acceptance. They had found home, not a place but a person, each in the other. And as Philip led his wife into their cabin that night, into the life they would build together one day at a time, he silently thanked whatever force had moved him to share his bread with a hungry stranger. That single act of kindness had given him everything that mattered. It had given him Ferra, fierce and loyal and beautiful beyond measure. It had given him love, the kind that would endure whatever storms came, because it was built on a foundation of sacrifice and choice and unwavering commitment. The cabin door closed behind them, shutting out the cool autumn night, and inside, warmed by firelight and each other's presence, Phillip Reeves and Ferra Flint began their married life together. They would face challenges still, he knew. Frontier life was never easy, and even in Refuge, there would be difficulties and dangers. But they would face them together. Two souls bound by choice and love, and that would be enough, more than enough. It would be everything.